Graziani.
Rodolfo Graziani is the main antagonist in the 1981 Libyan historical war film, Lion of the Desert. He was one of the most powerful military leaders in Italy. He is a loyal and devoted supporter of Benito Mussolini. Mussolini wants to put an end to the rebellion in Libya, where 4 of his governors have already failed.
I will not let it go on! This green, this battle green, there's your prize. The rest is brown paper.
As a result, he sends one of his most senior generals, General Rodolfo Graziani, to crush the rebels and capture their leader, Omar Mukhtar.
Bring me back Mukhtar. Bribe him, or break his neck.
When Graziani arrives in Libya, he is met by a serious and big celebration. When the general hears a report of a failure, he instantly reveals his true self. He warns his officers that
no peace,
and he uses every measure to put down the revolt. A force led by Major Tamelli begins terrorizing a village's residents. The villagers' livestock are burned, some are taken with them, and a wounded rebel is publicly killed. Those who make an attempt to resist are shot with machine guns. This, however, did not frighten the Bedouins but had the opposite effect. Several of them later joined Mukhtar's rebels in their struggle against the Italians. Tamelli and his men pursue Mukhtar's squad, but they are surprisingly ambushed by the insurgents. Tamelli was shot in the head, and almost his whole force is destroyed. Only a young lieutenant and an automobile remained.
We do not kill prisoners. They do it to us. They are not our teachers.
Mukhtar handed over the force's flag to the lieutenant and informed him that,
Tell your general it does not belong here.
Following the news, Graziani reminds his officers that they are battling an entire nation, not just a few people. Again, his officers decimated the local populations, covered the wells with sand, and burnt the crops and fields. The majority of the population is deported to concentration camps. Later on, Colonel Diodiece was dispatched by Graziani to negotiate peace and order with Omar Mukhtar.
And where is this general who bombs and burns and hangs? Why has he never come here?
However, this is really a cover to give the general more time and allow additional forces to arrive in Libya, without the rebels knowing about it. Graziani not only brought a large number of men, but also tanks and planes.
The first to use aircraft in combat. The first to put tanks in the desert. History will mark that, gentlemen.
When Omar and his associates finished the unsuccessful peace talks, Graziani marched his troops to the city of Kufra. Omar opposed defending Kufra since he realized there was no hope against an army of this size.
But we must fight him for Kufra.
Sometimes it is braver not to die. What is lost, count as lost.
But many rebels did. The rebels tried to oppose the attack, but Graziani ordered a full-scale attack.
Armor to the front.
Tank machine guns shot the riders, while artillery and mortars killed numerous insurgents. The tanks drove into the insurgents mercilessly, who were injured or lying on the sand. And the structures where the families were sheltering were completely destroyed. Graziani marched triumphantly into the destroyed Kufra with his force. His troops raised the Italian flag, and those who survived were executed. People who backed the insurgents were killed in detention camps after the siege. Graziani then chose to strike the rebels sheltering in the mountains, but this time he had a solid strategy in place, rather than just a simple attack.
Let's flush them out.
The Italians first deployed poison gas, which killed several of the insurgents. The Italians fired a machine gun as the gas spread. Graziani then bombarded the mountains with artillery for 5 days, but Omar and the insurgents were secure within. Graziani thought that Omar and his men had run out of options. The armored vehicles could cross a bridge in the highlands.
But the bridge, sir, I am surprised that Mukhtar hasn't tried to cut it.
That's because he's a natural fighter, not an educated one. He didn't go to military academy like you, gentlemen.
But Graziani knew the rebels might raid his forces. Graziani dispatched a smaller group to inspect the region. The bridge was also inspected for the presence of a bomb beneath it. The insurgents then attacked the Italians as planned. Graziani then directed the artillery to annihilate the insurgents, and were blasted apart by artillery fire. Graziani was overjoyed because he felt he had decimated most insurgent forces. He then directed his men to cross the bridge, accompanied by armored vehicles and tanks. However, Omar anticipated this, and the previous attack was part of the plan. After crossing the bridge, the advancing Italian forces arrived at an empty field. When Omar's riders appeared, the armored vehicles and tanks quickly began chasing them. However, it was a trap. The rebels blew up the dynamite beneath the vehicles and tanks. Many Bedouin cavalry assaulted the Italian troops from all angles, and the field was littered with burning wrecked Italian machines. Graziani was taken aback and surprised. The Italian troops battled with the cavalry and the insurgents, and his army was entirely decimated. Following that, Omar and the rebels retreated back to the mountains.
He is good. This old man is good.
Graziani, on the other hand, did not give up the battle. In 1930, he returned to Rome. The Duce was happy that, unlike the other governors, the general had returned to report and believed he had defeated the insurgents. Graziani said that defeating the rebels in the highlands would be too tough, but he devised a way.
A new Hadrian's Wall. Except that Hadrian used his walls to shut the barbarian out.
Which spanned so much ground that they entirely closed the border between Libya and Egypt with a barbed wire fence, preventing the rebels from receiving supplies and fleeing to Egypt.
Remember, it was Hadrian's Wall that kept the Romans in Britain 100 years longer.
Following Mussolini's approval of the proposal, the Italians constructed hundreds of kilometers of barbed wire walls between Libya and Egypt. Graziani personally examined the effectiveness of his wall with a few officers. On the barbed wire fences, there were some bodies. He thought the moment had arrived to put an end to the uprising once and for all. On the other hand, the rebels' condition became absolutely desperate, as there was no supply or support for several months. The following day, Omar and the surviving rebels came out of their hiding places and moved out. But they were ambushed by the pursuing Italian army. Some rebels met them and protected Omar. The Italians achieved an unstoppable breakthrough. After a brief struggle, some of the opposing rebels were killed, and the fleeing riders were pursued by armored vehicles armed with machine guns. Only a few rebels escaped, but Omar Mukhtar's horse was shot, and he was captured. He was taken to Graziani, who was attempting to persuade him to stand with him and be his man. He tried as pleasantly and promisingly as he could to get him on his side, but Omar refused to serve him.
I have not asked you for my life. Do not tell the world that in the privacy of this room, I asked you for my life.
No, I will not do that. I will not lie about you.
Graziani then delivered him to the court, where he was sentenced to death by hanging. Omar Mukhtar was executed on September 16, 1931, in year 9 of the Fascist era. Rodolfo Graziani was portrayed by the late Oliver Reed.
No, that's unfair, of course. I want peace, of course. I want to win that peace. But sometimes, Prince, when you're strong, peace takes on the nature of conquest, is enough.